The notification came at 2:47 p.m. Motion detected. Children's room. Alberto pulled up the feed expecting nothing, maybe the janitor cleaning early. The wheelchairs were empty. His twin sons were standing. And the woman kneeling in front of them wasn't a doctor or a therapist. She was nobody. Just a janitor he'd hired 3 weeks ago and never bothered to learn about. 18 months earlier, everything shattered in 17 seconds. The ambush came outside a restaurant. 3 gunmen. A black sedan. Bullets meant for Alberto hit the back seat where his twin sons were waiting. Marco and Luca survived. Their legs didn't. Spinal trauma, L1 L2, the neurosurgeon said. Paralysis from the waist down. Walking is highly unlikely. Possibly never. Alberto hired the best specialists in Europe. Bought equipment worth more than most homes. Nothing changed. The boys stayed in wheelchairs. Distant. Medicated. Broken. He accepted what the doctors told him. His sons would never walk again. Then came the caregivers. 7 disasters in 14 months. 1 sedated the boys to make her job easier. 1 stole jewelry. 1 sold medical details to journalists. 1 tried blackmail. After the 7th betrayal, Alberto stopped seeing people. He saw threats. He installed cameras everywhere. 16 feeds. Every room, every hallway. He watched obsessively, searching for the next lie, the next betrayal. Control replaced love. Surveillance replaced presence. When Gabriella Minoldo walked in wearing a janitor's uniform, Alberto barely looked up. You clean floors, he told her. You don't enter the children's room. You don't speak to them. You follow the schedule exactly. She nodded. Understood. But Gabriella didn't follow the rules. She lingered outside their room. Hummed old songs while mopping. Moved their legs gently when she thought no one was watching. Not medically, rhythmically, like she was reminding their bodies of something they'd forgotten. Alberto watched it all through his cameras, documenting her violations, building a case to fire her. Then Marco smiled when she hummed. Just a flicker. Luca's fingers moved when she spoke softly. Small things. Impossible things. Alberto told himself it meant nothing. The doctors had been clear. But late at night, alone with 16 glowing monitors, he watched this woman care for his sons with nothing but patience and belief. And something he'd buried the night of the shooting began to crack. He didn't trust it. Because hope, when you've weaponized paranoia to survive, doesn't feel like relief. It feels like the next trap. Hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about Impossible. On her 9th morning, Gabriella brought a wooden flute into the hallway outside the twins' room. She didn't ask permission. She just played. Soft, simple notes. A melody Alberto didn't recognize. He watched from his office, ready to stop her. This wasn't protocol. The boys had scheduled music therapy with licensed specialists. But Marco turned his head toward the sound. His son, who stared at nothing most days, turned toward the music. Luca's fingers twitched against his armrest. Once. Twice. Alberto leaned into the monitor, heart hammering. Gabriella lowered the flute and spoke to the nurse in the doorway. My grandfather made this. Is it all right if I play sometimes? The nurse glanced at the twins. They seemed to like it. Alberto's throat went tight. When was the last time he'd done something for his sons that wasn't scheduled or measured? When had he stopped being their father and become their warden? That afternoon, Alberto walked toward the therapy room for the first time in weeks. He told himself he needed to check the equipment. But when he reached the door and heard Gabriella's voice inside, he stopped. She was reading a story. Something about a bird who couldn't fly but refused to stay on the ground. Everyone told him it was impossible, she read quietly. But he climbed to the top of the hill every single day. And every single day, he jumped. Through the crack in the door, Alberto saw his sons arranged in their wheelchairs, facing her. Listening. For the first time since the shooting, they looked like children instead of patients. And Alberto realized the cameras had been showing him everything except what mattered. The real shock came 3 weeks later, when the cameras caught something no doctor said could happen. And Alberto realized the cameras had been showing him everything except what mattered. But old habits die harder than hope is born. By the next morning, Alberto was back in his office. Back behind the monitors. Back to watching life instead of living it. The mansion had 42 rooms. He lived in 4 of them. His office. His bedroom. The kitchen when his housekeeper forced him to eat. The surveillance room when sleep wouldn't come. The rest was just expensive emptiness. Guarded. Hollow. Dead. The twins' room sat at the end of the east wing, as far from Alberto's quarters as the architecture allowed. He told himself it was for their privacy. For quiet during therapy sessions. The truth was simpler. He couldn't bear to be close. Every morning started the same way. 5:30 a.m. Espresso he didn't finish. Laptop open before sunrise. 3 monitors. 16 camera feeds. He watched his sons wake up through a screen. Marco always curled slightly to the left. Luca's breathing was deeper, more rhythmic. Alberto knew these details the way other fathers knew their children's laughter, through observation, through distance, through glass. He hadn't touched them in 4 months. The twins' room looked nothing like a childhood. No toys on the floor. No drawings on walls. Just medical equipment arranged with surgical precision. 2 adjustable beds. 2 wheelchairs. Monitors tracking vitals. A medication cart color-coded by schedule. Parallel bars for therapy sessions that went nowhere. White walls. Tile floors. Antimicrobial curtains. It looked like a hospital room because Alberto had made it one. Sterile. Controlled. Safe from disappointment. At 7 a.m., the physical therapist arrived. Alberto watched her move through prescribed exercises. Passive range of motion. 15 minutes per leg. Documented. Measured. Pointless. The boys' faces never changed. Blank. Medicated. Distant. Guards rotated every 6 hours. Staff followed schedules down to the minute. Everyone had clearance levels, assigned zones, limited access. No anomalies. No breaches. No surprises. The mansion ran like a machine. Efficient. Isolated. Breathing but not alive. Then Gabriella started staying late. Small at first. She'd finish mopping outside the twins' room at 9:45 instead of 9:30. 15 extra minutes. Then 20. Then 30. Alberto noticed immediately. On the cameras, he watched her slow down near their door. She'd wipe the same baseboard twice. Reorganize her cart. Check her watch. Stalling. On her 5th night, she stopped completely. Just stood outside the door, head tilted, listening. Alberto zoomed in. Her eyes were closed. Her hand rested on the doorframe. What was she doing? The next night, longer. 3 full minutes standing motionless outside a room she had no clearance to enter. Alberto's jaw tightened. On the 7th night, the night nurse left the door cracked while retrieving medication from the supply closet. Gabriella stepped inside. 1 step. Not touching anything. Not approaching the beds. Just standing in the doorway, looking at his sleeping sons. Alberto's hand moved to his phone, ready to call security. Then he saw her face on the monitor. She wasn't casing the room. She wasn't calculating boundaries to cross. She was crying. Silent tears running down her face as she looked at his children. Like she recognized something in them. Something broken she'd seen before. Alberto's thumb hovered over the security contact, but he didn't press it. Because for the first time since the shooting, someone looked at his sons and saw more than a medical file, and that terrified him more than any betrayal ever could. 3 nights later, Gabriella didn't leave after her shift ended. Alberto watched the timestamp. 10:47 p.m. Her shift ended at 10:30. She should have clocked out 17 minutes ago. Instead, she was sitting on the floor outside the twins' room, back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. Just sitting there. In the dark hallway. Doing nothing. Alberto leaned closer to the monitor. What was she waiting for? At 11:02, the night nurse stepped out to use the restroom down the hall. Gabriella stood, smoothed her uniform, and walked into the twins' room. Alberto's hand shot to his phone. This was it. The violation he'd been waiting for. But she didn't touch anything. Didn't open drawers or check medications. She just walked to the space between their beds and knelt down. Then she started talking. Alberto turned up the audio feed. "My name is Gabriella," she said softly. "I know you can't answer me. I know the doctors say you might not even hear me. But I don't believe that." Alberto's chest tightened. "I think you hear everything," she continued. "I think you're in there, paying attention, noticing things everyone else misses. Am I right?" Silence. The boys didn't move. "Your father watches you through cameras," Gabriella said. "Did you know that? He thinks I don't notice, but I see them. The little red lights. He's probably watching right now." Alberto's breath caught. "He watches because he's afraid. Not of you. Of losing you more than he already has. That's not weakness. That's love that doesn't know where to go." Marco's left hand twitched. Alberto froze. "You miss him, don't you?" Gabriella whispered. "You miss when he used to hold you. Before the fear. Before the cameras." Luca's head turned. Just a fraction of an inch. Toward her voice. Alberto rewound the footage. Watched it again. The hand movement. The head turn. Reflexes, he told himself. Meaningless muscle spasms. The neurologist had explained this. But he watched it a third time anyway. Gabriella stood and walked to Marco's bedside. She didn't touch him. Just stood close enough that he could sense her presence. "You're not broken," she said firmly. "You're hurt. There's a difference. And hurt things can heal if someone refuses to give up on them." Marco's fingers curled slightly. Alberto's pulse hammered in his ears. Over the next week, he watched Gabriella's late-night visits obsessively. Same pattern. Same timing. Same words spoken like prayers over his sons. And small things kept happening. Eye movements when she entered. Finger twitches when she spoke. Breathing patterns that shifted when she hummed. Things the doctors said were impossible. Alberto sat in his office at 3 a.m., replaying footage for the 7th time, trying to find the rational explanation. Fire her, logic demanded. She's violating protocol, crossing boundaries, creating dangerous false hope. But his hand wouldn't reach for the phone. Because part of him, the part he'd buried with his son's future, wanted to see what would happen if someone refused to accept impossible. And that possibility scared him more than every betrayal combined. On the 14th night, Gabriella did something that made Alberto's blood run cold. She moved their legs. Not the clinical, prescribed movements the therapists performed. Not the 15-minute routine documented in medical charts. She sat on the floor between their beds, took Marco's left foot gently in her hands, and began moving it in slow, rhythmic circles. Like a dance. Like a memory. Alberto's hand slammed on his desk. What the hell is she doing? This wasn't therapy. This was dangerous. Unsupervised manipulation of compromised spinal injuries. One wrong angle could cause permanent damage. He grabbed his phone to call security. Then Gabriella started humming. An old melody. Something that sounded like a lullaby from another era. And Marco laughed. Not a smile. Not a small reaction. A laugh. Soft. Breathy. Real. The phone slipped from Alberto's hand. He hadn't heard that sound in 18 months. Not since before the restaurant. Before the gunfire. Before the wheelchairs and the doctors and the careful, final words. Marco used to laugh at everything. Luca would make faces across the dinner table and Marco would dissolve into giggles so hard he'd nearly fall out of his chair. They'd chase each other through the hallways, their laughter echoing off marble floors. Alberto had forgotten that sound existed. Now it was coming through a security feed at midnight, triggered by a janitor who had no medical training and no permission to be there. Gabriella moved to Luca's legs. Same gentle rhythm. Same humming. Luca's toes flexed. Alberto leaned so close to the monitor his nose almost touched the screen. Toes. Flexing. On command. In response to stimulus. The neurologist's voice echoed in his memory. Paralysis at this level is complete. Voluntary movement below the injury site is not possible. But Alberto was watching it happen. Come on, sweetheart, Gabriella whispered. I know you're in there. I know you feel this. Luca's entire foot moved. Pulled back. Extended forward. Small. Shaking. Undeniable. Alberto's chest constricted. His vision blurred. His carefully constructed acceptance of medical reality cracked down the middle. This wasn't possible. The doctors had been clear. The scans didn't lie. The prognosis was final. But his sons were moving. Fear flooded through him. Not the fear of loss he'd carried for 18 months. Something worse. The fear of hope. Of believing. Of letting himself think maybe, just maybe, the impossible wasn't final. Because if he believed and it failed, if he opened that door and watched it slam shut again, he wouldn't survive it. But if he ignored this, if he fired Gabriella and went back to accepted reality, he'd spend the rest of his life wondering what might have happened. At 4 a.m., Alberto opened his laptop and typed Gabriella Minoldo's name into a private investigation database. If she was performing miracles in his home, he needed to know why. And what he found in her past made everything make sense, and nothing make sense at all. The file loaded at 4:23 a.m. Gabriella Minoldo. Age 52. No criminal record. No red flags. Employment history, cleaning services, janitorial work, hospital housekeeping. Then Alberto found the gap. 2009 to 2015. 6 years. No employment. No tax records. Nothing. He dug deeper. Hospital records from Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. Pediatric Neurology Department. Patient name, David Monaldo. Age at admission, 7 years old. Diagnosis, complete spinal cord injury, T12. Workplace accident. Steel beam collapse at a construction site where his mother had brought him during summer break. Prognosis, permanent paralysis from the waist down. No expected recovery. Alberto's stomach turned. The medical notes read like his son's files. Cold. Clinical. Final. Mother has been informed of the permanent nature of the injury. Psychological services recommended to assist with acceptance. But Gabriella hadn't accepted. The records showed 127 physical therapy sessions over 3 years. Most insurance companies covered 20. She'd paid out of pocket for the rest. Worked double shifts in Queens. Sold her car. Moved from Forest Hills to a studio in Astoria. Doctor's notes grew increasingly frustrated. Mother continues to push for aggressive intervention despite clear prognosis. Explained again that spontaneous recovery at this level is medically impossible. Mother insists on continuing therapy. Family counseling recommended. Mother's refusal to accept reality is hindering child's emotional adjustment. Then, in 2014, a note that made Alberto's hand freeze on the mouse. Patient David M. demonstrated voluntary toe movement during session. Neurologist consulted. Recommending updated imaging. 3 months later, patient took first assisted steps. Phenomenon unexplained given severity of initial injury. Continued therapy approved. 2015. Patient discharged. Walking independently with minimal assistance device. Case flagged for medical journal review. Alberto sat back in his chair, hands shaking. Gabriella's son had walked. Against every medical prediction. Against every doctor who'd told her to stop trying. He scrolled further. Found a single interview in a New York medical journal. When asked how she maintained hope during the years doctors insisted recovery was impossible, Ms. Monaldo stated, "I didn't have hope. Hope is passive. I had refusal. I refused to agree with people who had never seen my son fight." The interviewer had asked if she'd share her story more widely. Her response was one sentence. "No one asks janitors how miracles happen." Alberto closed the laptop. For 18 months, he'd had specialists, equipment, and endless resources. And he'd given up in 6 weeks. Gabriella had nothing but stubbornness and a refusal to accept finality. And she'd won. The shame hit him like a physical weight. He'd stopped being his son's father and become their observer, documenting their stillness instead of fighting for their movement. While Gabriella, a woman he'd barely acknowledged existed, had walked into his home and done what he'd been too afraid to do. She'd refused to let them be finished. Alberto stood and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over the estate. The fountain in the courtyard still wasn't running. He'd meant to fix it for months. Always tomorrow. Always later. Always accepting broken things as permanent. But if a janitor could refuse to accept the impossible, maybe he could too. The question was, had he realized it in time, or had his fear already cost his sons the only chance they'd ever have? Alberto didn't sleep. He spent the rest of the night reading medical journals he'd avoided for 18 months. Neuroplasticity. Spinal cord rehabilitation. Cases of incomplete injuries misdiagnosed as complete. Stories of recovery that took years, not weeks. Stories doctors never told him because he'd never asked. At 9 a.m., Dr. Reyes arrived for the twins' quarterly evaluation. She was the neurologist from Columbia Presbyterian, the one who'd delivered the original prognosis. Alberto met her in the therapy room for the first time in 6 months. She looked surprised to see him there. "Mr. Moreno, I wasn't expecting." "Just do the examination," he said. Dr. Reyes worked through her routine. Reflex tests, sensory responses, range of motion assessments. Then she stopped. Her brow furrowed. She tested Marco's foot again. Ran her pen along his sole. "That's unusual," she murmured. "What?" Alberto's voice came out sharper than intended. "He's responding to plantar stimulation. That wasn't present in previous examinations." She moved to Luca. Same test. Same response. She looked up at Alberto, professional mask cracking slightly. "Has there been any change in their therapy protocol?" "No," Alberto lied. Dr. Reyes pulled out her tablet, scrolling through previous reports. "The muscle tone has improved. There's voluntary movement in the lower extremities that shouldn't be possible with complete L1, L2 injuries." "Shouldn't be possible," Alberto repeated. "But it is possible." Dr. Reyes hesitated, choosing words carefully. "I need to revise my assessment. The original prognosis was based on the assumption of complete severance. What I'm seeing now suggests the injury may have been incomplete. Or what? Or there's been neural recovery we don't fully understand." She met his eyes. "Mr. Moreno, I need to be clear. This doesn't mean they'll walk. But the language needs to change from never to possible." Possible. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Dr. Reyes left 30 minutes later with instructions for updated imaging and expanded therapy protocols. Alberto stood in the empty therapy room, staring at his son's wheelchairs. 18 months. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. The best specialists money could buy. And none of them had used the word possible. Because he'd paid them to maintain, not to believe. He'd hired people to manage his son's paralysis, not to fight it. He'd bought comfort. Accepted reality. Scheduled grief into neat, documented routines. While Gabriella had walked in with nothing but refusal and changed everything. That night, Alberto didn't go to his office. He walked to the twins' room and stood in the doorway, not watching through cameras, but present physically there. Marco and Luca were asleep. Gabriella sat in the corner, mending a small tear in one of their blankets. She looked up. Their eyes met. "You know about my son," she said quietly. "Not a question." "Yes." "Then you know I can't promise you anything. David's recovery took 4 years. Some children never walk. Some do. I don't predict miracles, Mr. Moreno." "Then what do you do?" Gabriella set down the blanket. "I refuse to agree with people who've decided your children are finished. That's all." Alberto's throat tightened. "I decided they were finished." "I know," she said softly. "But you're here now. That's what matters." He looked at his sleeping sons. Really looked. Not through a screen. Not through medical reports. Just saw them. His children. Still fighting. Still here. "Teach me," Alberto said. "Whatever you're doing. I want to learn." Gabriella smiled. Sad. Knowing. It's not complicated, Mr. Moreno. You just have to show up. And for the first time in 18 months, Alberto realized that might be the hardest thing he'd ever have to do, but if there was even the smallest chance his sons could stand again, he'd face every fear that had kept him hidden behind cameras. Starting tomorrow, he told himself. But tomorrow came faster than he expected, and what the cameras captured that afternoon would force him to face everything at once. The notification came at 2:47 p.m. Motion detected. Children's room. Alberto was in a meeting with his accountant. He glanced at his phone, expecting nothing. Probably Gabriella cleaning early. Maybe the physical therapist arriving ahead of schedule. He opened the app anyway. The wheelchairs were empty. Alberto's heart stopped. The beds were empty. His chair hit the floor as he stood. Get out, he told the accountant. Mr. Moreno, we're not finished. Out. The man fled. Alberto's hands shook as he zoomed in on the feed. Where were they? Where were his sons? Kidnapping. His mind went there immediately. Someone had breached security. Taken them. This was retaliation. This was. Then he saw them. In the center of the room. Standing. Marco and Luca. Upright. Legs trembling. Backs straight. Hands gripping Gabriella's arms like lifelines. And Gabriella was crying. Tears streaming down her face as she held her arms extended, creating a bridge between them. You're doing it, she whispered. You're standing. Both of you. Do you feel it? Marco's legs shook violently. Luca's face was red with effort. But they were standing. Alberto couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Couldn't process what he was seeing through the screen. 18 months in wheelchairs. 18 months of doctors saying never. 18 months of accepting permanent. And his sons were standing. I'm going to let go a little, Gabriella said, voice steady despite her tears. Just a little. I'm right here. No, Alberto whispered at the screen. Don't. They'll fall. They'll. She released one hand from each boy. They swayed. Marco's left leg buckled slightly. Luca's arms windmilled. But they didn't fall. Good, Gabriella breathed. So good. Now I want you to try something. Marco, can you move your right foot forward? Just a little. No. Too soon. Too dangerous. They weren't ready. But Marco did it. His right foot slid forward. 6 inches. Maybe less. But forward. Luca, your turn. Luca's left foot followed. Shaking. Scraping against the floor. But moving. Again, Gabriella whispered. Together this time. They moved. Step. Pause. Step. Not walking. Not really. More like controlled falling. Each movement a negotiation with gravity. But they were moving forward. Toward Gabriella's outstretched arms. Toward something impossible. Alberto's phone slipped from his hands. Crashed to the floor. Screen cracking. He didn't notice. His sons were walking. His paralyzed sons were walking. And he was watching it happen through a camera. 18 months of surveillance. Of distance. Of protecting himself from hope. And the most important moment of his children's lives was happening on a screen while he sat alone in his office. Something inside Alberto shattered. Not his control. Not his fear. His acceptance of watching instead of living. He ran. Alberto ran. Not the calculated walk of a man who controlled everything. A full sprint. Down the hallway. Past startled guards. Past his head of security shouting questions he didn't answer. The East Wing had never felt so far away. His lungs burned. His vision tunneled. 18 months of watching from a distance collapsed into seconds of desperate movement. He hit the door to the twins' room and it flew open. The first thing he saw was Gabriella on the floor, sitting back on her heels, arms around both boys. Marco and Luca were collapsed against her. Exhausted. Sobbing. Shaking. But upright. Still partially upright. Papa. Marco's voice. Broken. Small. Real. Alberto's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees and crawled the last few feet. His hands reached for his sons. Actually reached for them, touched them, pulled them toward him for the first time in months. "I'm here," he choked out. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Luca's small hands gripped his shirt. Marco's face pressed into his shoulder. They were crying. He was crying. Gabriella was crying. All of them on the floor in a tangle of limbs and 18 months of buried grief finally breaking open. "You did it," Alberto whispered into Marco's hair. "You walked. You both walked." "It hurt," Luca sobbed. "Papa, it hurt so much." I know, baby." Alberto pulled them closer, feeling their weight, their warmth, their aliveness. "But you did it anyway. You're so strong. So much stronger than I knew." Gabriella started to pull away, giving them space. Alberto's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "Don't. Please." She stayed. "I watched you," Alberto said, voice breaking. "For weeks. Through cameras. I watched you fight for them when I'd stopped. I watched you refuse to give up when I'd already buried their future." "Mr. Moreno." "I was afraid," he interrupted. "Afraid that if I believed and lost them again, it would kill me. So I stopped being their father. I became their observer. I documented their paralysis instead of fighting it." Marco's hand found his face. Tiny fingers against his wet cheek. "You're here now," Gabriella said softly. "That's what matters." "Is it?" Alberto looked at his sons. Really looked. Saw the exhaustion in their eyes. The pain. But also something else. Pride. Determination. Life. "I missed this," he whispered. "I missed you. I was right here and I missed everything." "We missed you too," Marco said. And those 4 words broke something in Alberto that cameras and control and careful distance had kept locked away. He pulled his sons close and let himself feel it. All of it. The terror. The hope. The grief he'd been running from since the night bullets tore apart their future. But also the impossible present. The moment his paralyzed sons had walked. And he'd almost missed it by watching through a screen. Alberto looked up at Gabriella. "How long?" "How long what?" "How long until they can do it without help? Walk on their own?" Gabriella's expression shifted. Sad. Knowing. "Mr. Moreno, this might be all they ever do. Today might be the peak. There are no guarantees." The words should have destroyed him. But Alberto looked at his sons, sweaty and shaking and crying in his arms, and realized something. This moment, right here, right now, holding them without a screen between them, this was already more than he'd let himself hope for. And if this was all they ever achieved, it would be enough. Because he'd stopped watching and started being present. But what Gabriella didn't tell him, what she'd learned from years of watching impossible things happen slowly, was that first steps were never the end. They were only the beginning. That evening, after the doctors had come and gone, after the boys had been examined and settled into bed exhausted but smiling, Alberto found Gabriella in the hallway. She was packing her cleaning cart, preparing to leave. "How did you know?" he asked. She looked up. "Know what?" "That they could do it. That they weren't finished." "How did you know when every doctor said otherwise?" Gabriella was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down the mop she'd been organizing. "I didn't know, Mr. Moreno. I never knew. With my son, I didn't know. Today, I didn't know." She met his eyes. "Belief isn't the same as certainty. I didn't know your sons would walk. I just refused to agree with everyone who said they were finished." "That's it? Refusal. And showing up," she added. "Every single day. Even when nothing changed. Even when it seemed pointless. Especially then." Alberto leaned against the wall. "I'm not good at that. Showing up without knowing the outcome." "No one is at first," Gabriella said gently. "But you learn. Or you decide what matters more, protecting yourself or fighting for them." She picked up her cart. "I should go." "Gabriella." She turned back. "Don't clock out yet. I need your help with something." It took 3 hours. Alberto had the medical equipment moved to a storage room. Everything except what the doctors said was absolutely necessary. The hospital bed frames were replaced with regular beds. Soft ones. With quilts Gabriella picked out that had stars and spaceships on them. The monitors came down. The medication cart was relocated to a small cabinet, out of sight. Marco and Luca watched from their wheelchairs, eyes wide. "Papa, what are you doing?" Luca asked. "Making your room a bedroom instead of a hospital." Alberto knelt in front of them. "No more machines watching you sleep. No more white walls. This is your space now. Tell me what you want in it." "Toys." Marco asked hesitantly, like he was afraid to hope. "Whatever you want." "Books." "Yes." Can we have the picture of Mama back?" Alberto's throat closed. He'd removed all of Sarah's photos from the house. Too painful. Too much reminder of everything he'd lost. But his sons had lost her too. And he'd taken even her image away from them. "Yes," he whispered. "We'll put her right here where you can see her every morning." Over the next week, the room transformed. Bookshelves. A rug with a map of the world. Drawings from art therapy taped to walls. A small keyboard because Luca mentioned once that he liked music. And Alberto was there for it. Not watching through cameras. Present. Sitting with them. Reading to them. Listening. The wheelchairs stayed. The reality of their injury didn't disappear because he'd decided to stop hiding from it. But the boys smiled more. Laughed more. Asked questions about their mother. About the world outside. About tomorrow. On the 8th day, Alberto walked into his office and stared at the 3 monitors on the wall. 16 camera feeds. 18 months of surveillance. He picked up his phone and called his head of security. "Remove the cameras from the twins' room. All of them." "Sir, that's a significant security." "I don't care. Take them down today." That evening, Alberto sat between his sons' beds without a screen in his hand. Just sitting. Being there. "Papa." Marco said sleepily, "Yes." Are you staying? Alberto looked at his son. Really looked. Not through a lens. Not from a distance. Yes, he said. I'm staying. Marco smiled and closed his eyes. The future was still uncertain. The doctors still used words like progress and possible instead of guaranteed. Alberto still didn't know if his sons would walk independently, if today's steps would lead to more or if they'd remain a beautiful, singular moment. But he'd learned something more important than certainty. He'd learned that presence was the only guarantee that mattered. And for the first time since the shooting, Alberto Moreno stopped trying to control the future and started showing up for the present, which turned out to be exactly where miracles had been waiting all along. 6 months later, Alberto watched his sons walk across the garden. Slow, shaky, but walking. Gabriella sat nearby with her wooden flute, playing that same melody. The cameras were still off. Alberto had built an empire on control and surveillance. A janitor taught him that the strongest thing he could ever do was just show up. No screens. No distance. Just presence. Marco stumbled. Alberto caught him. And the man who watched life from behind glass finally learned to live it. If this moved you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that impossible isn't final. Sometimes miracles are just on the other side of showing up.